Welcome to the Let's Get Entrepreneurial podcast, your go-to resource for navigating the world of entrepreneurship. In this episode, we explore the vital skill of resource allocation, a key to entrepreneurial success. Join us as we unravel proven strategies and offer actionable insights to help foster innovation, drive business growth, and steer your venture towards success.
The Let's Get Entrepreneurial podcast is your ultimate launchpad for igniting ideas and skyrocketing your entrepreneurial dreams. Tune in, buckle up, and let's unleash the entrepreneurial spirit within. Your two hosts will be Professor Gary Palin and serial entrepreneur Ryan Budden.
Hello, Professor Palin. How are you?
Doing really well. How are you doing?
I'm doing brilliantly, thanks. We've gotten together to discuss the cool topic of resource allocation. We've talked a lot about getting into markets and how to identify markets. The next step is once you're involved in a market and you have resources to play with, what are you going to do with them?
Managing and allocating those resources is very important. Or the flip side of that, mismanaging them and allocating them incorrectly can be the death of the company.
We like to start with the definition of resource allocation. It's an economic term referring to resources, either labor, money, time, or technology being allocated to different and various uses in a business. Essentially, what are you doing with all the things that you have, whether it's your time, other people's time, the money, or even the thought that you're putting behind things? What are you doing with it?
And that time is an interesting one because people will tend to think of financial resources very often, sometimes intellectual capital. People overlook that time component because they think their time isn't valuable.
Right. And it's probably the biggest part of resource allocation that you and I talk about is how much time some of these things take, where everybody takes that for granted. And if you're on a small team or a solopreneur, you simply don't have the time in the day to be tackling all of these different things.
And that's something that everyone has an equal amount of resources, no matter who you are, is time.
Yeah. There's only 24 hours in a day, and you do need to sleep at some point.
Yes, even though sleep is overrated, but you do need to sleep at some point.
I thought since this is an economic term, we'd bring a couple other economic principles into this to sort of frame the discussion. The first one is scarcity. Scarcity is just the knowledge that things are not limitless. So time isn't limitless. You can't infinitely distribute time. There's only 24 hours in a day. If you have employees and your expectation was them is that they work 8 hours a day, there's only 8 hours in a day, 40 hours in a week, assuming they're working a standard work week.
And when you have employees too, a mistake that I see people make is they think their employees are going to work as hard as they do. They don't own the business. That's a mistake. They're not going to.
There's some pretty crazy statistics about how much work actually gets done during the average workday. Pew puts out a big research study every year on it. And I think the average is like 3 hours and 45 minutes of actual work getting done in an 8-hour day. Setting expectations, especially if you're getting into the game of entrepreneurship, and this might be the first person or people that you've hired before, comparing that to the output that you're putting out in a single day is going to be a little bit of a shock.
So if you're putting out an output of, say, 100 units, don't expect that first employee to put out 100 units.
Right. A really, really great employee might still only be putting out 60, and it might be fantastic.
When I'm planning that, I think of the term shrinkage. So when you're planning your budget, shrinkage basically is a polite way of people coming into your retail store and stealing, or things going out the back door.
Sure, yeah. I hadn't even thought about that as a limit on your resources, but yeah, it's true.
That time, in essence, is shrinkage from people cruising the internet while they should be at work and doing various things and not putting 100% of their effort into it.
That's exactly right. Or at 5:01, not answering the phone call that comes in because their workday technically ended at 5. Or not technically, it literally ended at 5.
Yes, and they probably started packing up about 4:45.
Absolutely. Just realizing that that's a reality and that scarcity applies to time. It also applies to financial resources. Most people listening to this understand that it applies to financial resources. If you have $20 in your bank account, you only have $20 to spend. Even a credit card, which some people view as fake money until it comes due, still has a limit on it. So you still can't run it up higher than a certain value.
Those credit cards are not monopoly money.
They certainly are not. And that is a lesson I think most people of the first credit card era have to learn.
Today, in the current economic model, the interest that you pay on a credit card is over 20%.
Oh my goodness. I mean, that's crazy. That's like payday loans. How somebody can afford to pay that off over time is wild if you're not closing your balances out, properly managing it with whatever risk strategy that you have in place.
So if you're throwing your credit card to pay the bills and think that's a long-term strategy, all you're doing is servicing the debt, but it's growing and growing and growing.
That's right.
Financial resources is an interesting one, though. I think that's probably the one that comes to most people's mind because most people don't have the financial resources to start the business.
That, and hopefully people are used to budgeting personally. So budgeting in their personal life and realizing that you can't be going out to steak dinners and movies every single night.
For sure. And I look at financial resources basically coming from 4 different areas. One is equity. That's the business owners, the shareholders, the angels and VCs putting funds into the business. Another is debt, which is borrowing money from financial institutions such as banks. Revenue, hopefully, is your major income stream. Your sales are covering your finances. There is another one that's in play with a few businesses, grants and subsidies.
Sure. And managing a grant or subsidy is a whole nother endeavor.
Another episode on a podcast.
There we go. The other economic principle that I thought would be good to frame this conversation in is opportunity cost. Understanding that once you have these financial resources, you've tallied what you have and tallied the buckets you have to put it into. Taking a financial resource and committing it somewhere, or taking a resource in general and committing it somewhere, by definition, means that you are not putting it somewhere else.
Absolutely. So are you putting into expansion business growth? Are you putting into innovation to develop an R&D budget? You only have limited amount of resources. Where are we going to allocate them? What is the optimal use of my time?
Exactly right. And the not factor really is what keeps me up at night when I'm thinking about where I'm putting. If I put it into research and development in a year, in 6 months, could I have a new product that's going to change the game? Or am I just now getting another support staff in so I can have a better experience for my current customers? It's those trade-offs that start making this a very complex game.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you have to pick one or the other typically.
Right.
Even you're looking at it, operational efficiencies can be used for resources, customer satisfaction for resources, both important, but you don't have unlimited resources is the bottom line.
That's exactly right. When we're thinking about how a business decides to put resources somewhere, do you have a favorite tool or psychological game that you play?
Well, I look at my business goals. That's where I start. What am I trying to accomplish? And that is also long-term and short-term objectives.
Right.
Because there are times I have to make resource allocations that are not actually long-term advantages, but they're imperative in the short term because if I don't allocate them, I won't survive for the long term.
You won't get to that long-term output that you're desiring.
The goal is what am I trying to accomplish? But I also look at what are the market conditions? What's the competition? What's the consumer demand? The economic climate. Today, we're dealing with some economic uncertainty. So those are factors dealing with market conditions. What is the scalability associated with this? So therefore, what is the potential of growth associated with the scalability? What technological advances are down the line? For example, right now, we're seeing a lot of companies trying to make juggling resources with AI.
Yeah, they're trying to maximize a single person's time using artificial intelligence. You're seeing that a lot in particular the creative fields or content creation fields.
I would encourage any business owner to basically do a resource health checkup continually. Always monitor it, always look at it in the direction of where am I heading? What am I trying to accomplish? What resources do I have? What resources will I need?
The way I always try and look at it is I find that business owners, including myself, get zoomed in on specific buckets that they can put resource allocation towards because that's the day-to-day. If it's into research and development, that feels all encompassing. If it's into marketing, that feels all encompassing. When you're in these planning periods where you're looking at where resources are going, doing the 10,000-foot flyover, making sure that you see the whole chessboard and you're not just focused on where the rook is going to move next.
Absolutely. It's a big picture. and you don't want to have tunnel vision.
Yes, that's really difficult. In the day-to-day of running a business, tunnel vision is a very overwhelming sensation.
Well, you also have a personal habit, I believe, from our discussions, is that you review this on a periodic basis. Was it weekly or monthly that you do this?
I only allow myself to review it monthly. If I don't, I end up spending a lot of time on the potentialities, playing this game out of using game theory to see how things could evolve. Only once a month do I allow myself to reshuffle the resources. Once I have a plan for that month, I'm committed to it for a month, and I review the results at the end of the month and decide the plan for the next month.
It sounds like a plan. I wish I was that disciplined to do that.
Well, I have to be, or else I'd be in planning mode 24 hours a day. That's the area that I get a lot of enjoyment out of.
Are there any examples that you can think of companies that have done a good job with resource allocation?
I don't know that they've done a good job, but I think the companies that are easy to point towards are the big companies like Apple that seemingly always have this research and development pipeline coming out. So pretty consistently on the 18-month mark, there's new products and services coming out. They seemingly from the outside have a very good balance of supporting existing customers as well as creating new products and services that their customer base loves. If you're an Apple fan, it seems like everyone's a mega Apple fan. If you're not an Apple fan, then you don't fit into that category.
They've had a great success with people that are just obsessed with that particular brand on a different scale. I think Harley has done the same thing, Harley Davidson.
Yeah. My one drawback to Apple is they famously have an insanely large cash reserve that they're not seemingly doing anything with.
Another company that I think has done a really good job is Google, because they really started off basically looking as a search engine to prioritize providing information that was universally accessible. And now you look at the areas that Google's into with Gmail, mobile operating systems with Android, the list goes on and on and on. And they've consciously developed resources and moved it into those areas for expansion.
Google's an amazing example of that. Amazon AWS is really what stands out to me. They have a theory that if you can't say no to something, you have to do it. In the internal company, and I might get this slightly wrong, so feel free to Google this, but the theory is the manager can't just say no to an idea. If they need to say no to an idea, they have to essentially get other people involved to say no. That means that small ideas don't get squashed. So you have to have a reason to say no to somebody. Amazon AWS famously came out of this. The direct manager couldn't say, no, that's a bad idea. So it went up to the next level manager. They couldn't say, no, that's a bad idea, even though it had nothing to do with the core service at the time. And eventually got all the way to the top. And now it is what it is.
Yeah, and that's a cultural issue within Amazon, which is, I think, a smart move.
It's very cool.
Any final thoughts on resource allocation?
It's really fun if you make it a game. Make sure that you're looking at the 10,000-foot flyover and really viewing where the possibilities could lead you for the resources. When resources are really strict and not flowing, this can be pretty stressful. Make sure you're treating it like a game, which is what it is. And that could help with the stress. It helps me with the stress of it.
Basically, don't be a hamster on a wheel just running and not looking from above to see what are the resources that I have, what resources do I need.
Exactly. Well, let's get entrepreneurial.
Let's get entrepreneurial.
As we wrap up another episode of the Let's Get Entrepreneurial podcast, we extend our gratitude for your presence and attention. Your dedication to the entrepreneurial spirit fuels our passion for creating this podcast. Check out ProfSpirit.com to discover resources and courses designed specifically for innovators like you. Stay on the cutting edge by following us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, and other platforms as it is released. Until then, keep the entrepreneurial flame burning.